I smiled, nodded, and said, "Got it." Then I went to find a seat at my own party. I need to back up, because that sentence makes no sense without the full picture. And trust me, the full picture took me almost 2 years to fully understand. Not just what happened, but why I let it go on as long as I did. That is the part that still keeps me up sometimes. The part I had to work through with a lot of journaling and a lot of long drives by myself with the radio off. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Sophie. I am 31 years old. I work as a senior project manager for a mid-sized tech company in Austin, Texas. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your business and your mother's business and your grandmother's business and your grandmother's business going back 3 generations. I moved to Austin 6 years ago for a job opportunity, and I have never once regretted it, which says something about the town and probably something about my family too, though I spent a long time not wanting to admit that second part. I am the older of 2 daughters. My younger sister is 26 and her name is Danielle, though everyone in the family calls her Danny. Danny is sweet in the way that a lot of youngest children are sweet. She learned early that being charming was easier than being responsible, and she leaned into that lesson hard. I love her. I want to say that clearly, because everything I am about to tell you is not really about Danny. She was not the one who made the decision. She benefited from it, and she knew more than she let on. But the decision itself came from somewhere else entirely. It came from my parents. 18 months before the day I am going to describe, my father had open heart surgery. It was not entirely unexpected. He had been having warning signs for about a year, and his cardiologist had been pushing for the procedure. But when my mother called me at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in November, I still felt the floor drop out from under me. I booked the first flight I could find, which was not even a direct flight. And I sat in 2 different airports for a combined 4 hours thinking about every conversation I had ever been too busy to have with him. He came through the surgery fine. He is stubborn in the way that makes doctors quietly relieved, and he was walking the hospital hallways 24 hours after they closed him up. But while I was there, while the fear was still fresh and the relief had not fully settled in, I made a decision I would spend the next year and a half trying to undo. My parents are not good with money. I do not mean that as a criticism so much as a statement of fact, the same way you might say someone is not good with directions or not good at parallel parking. It is simply a thing that is true about them. My father worked for the county road department for 32 years and retired on a pension that covered the basics. My mother did bookkeeping part-time for a local hardware store. They were not poor, but they were always exactly one surprise expense away from stress, and surprises had a way of finding them. When my father came out of surgery and I saw how scared my mother looked standing in that waiting room, I thought about all the ways that fear was going to express itself over the next few months. The follow-up appointments, the cardiac rehab, the medications that insurance would cover partially and not at all. I thought about my mother calling me at midnight because she could not figure out how to transfer money to pay a bill and she did not want to wake Danny. And I thought, in what I can only describe as an emotionally compromised moment, that the easiest thing I could do was just give them access to my account so they could handle things without the back and forth. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking what a lot of people in my comments have said, which is some version of, "Why would you do that?" And I hear you. I heard it then, honestly, some quiet, rational voice in the back of my head that said, "This is not a good idea." But here's the thing about fear and love and guilt all arriving at the same time in a hospital waiting room. They tend to drown out the quiet, rational voice pretty effectively. I went to my bank's local branch in Ohio and I added both of my parents as authorized users on my primary checking account. The account had a little over $12,000 in it at the time. I sat down with a banker and I signed the paperwork, and I explained to my parents very clearly that this was temporary. That once my father was fully recovered and their finances were stable, I needed them to come back to the branch and have their access removed. My mother hugged me. My father, still moving slowly from the surgery, squeezed my hand and said I was a good daughter. The months that followed were fine, mostly. My father recovered well. I monitored the account from Austin and the withdrawals were reasonable. A couple of pharmacy runs, one larger transfer that my mother texted me about in advance. Some grocery charges that were slightly higher than I expected, but nothing alarming. By March, I felt comfortable that the emergency had passed, and I started trying to sort out the access situation. Here's where the story gets complicated in a way that I think is important to explain. Because the most common question I got when I eventually told people about this was some version of, why didn't you just remove them yourself? And the honest answer is that I tried. Multiple times. The account I had added them to was an older account I had opened when I was 22, right after college. It was set up as a joint account under my bank's older account structure, which meant that any change to the authorized users required all parties on the account to be present at a branch in person, with valid ID, or to submit a formal written request that had to be notarized and mailed in, not uploaded, physically mailed. I know how that sounds. But that was genuinely the policy on that particular account type, and the banker confirmed it when I called to ask. I scheduled an appointment for my parents to come in with me in April. My mother canceled it the day before, said my father was not feeling well. I rescheduled for May. My father called the morning of and said they had a conflict with a neighbor's event they had forgotten about. I rescheduled again for July when I was flying back to Ohio for a long weekend. We got as far as the parking lot of the bank before my mother said she had left her ID at home and she could not go in without it. I want you to sit with that image for a moment. The three of us in a parking lot in July. Me in the driver's seat. My mother in the passenger seat saying she left her ID at home. My father in the back seat looking out the window. I said, very calmly, that we could go back and get it. My mother said she was not sure she remembered where she put it. My father said maybe we should just reschedule for a time when everyone was more prepared. I drove them home. I went inside for exactly long enough to be polite. Then I got back in the rental car and I sat in their driveway for several minutes before I pulled out my phone and called my bank's customer service line again. They confirmed again that there was no remote option for this account type. I asked about closing the account entirely and opening a new one. The representative told me I could do that. But since my parents were authorized users, the bank would need to notify them and give them a standard 14-day period before the account could be formally closed, and that during that period all existing transactions and access would remain active. I called my mother. I told her I was going to initiate the account closure process, that they would receive a letter from the bank, and that I was going to open a new account in my name only and transfer my funds there before the closure period ended. My mother was quiet for a moment, and then she said that she wished I trusted them more. She said, after everything they had done for me, it hurt to feel like a suspect. I sat in that rental car for another 20 minutes after I hung up. I did not initiate the closure. I told myself I would do it remotely when I got back to Austin, when I was not feeling guilty and defensive. I kept telling myself that for 11 more months. In the meantime, I opened a secondary savings account at a different bank, in my name only, and I started moving most of my paycheck there. The old checking account had a few thousand in it at any given time, enough to cover what I was technically using it for, which was essentially nothing. I monitored it. I set up alerts. I told myself the situation was manageable. I got a bonus in January. It was a good one. My company had a strong Q4 and the performance bonuses reflected that. My direct deposit went into the old checking account because I had never gotten around to updating my payroll information, which I know. The deposit hit on a Friday. It was $19,200. I saw the deposit notification on my phone. I remember thinking I need to transfer this out today. I was in back-to-back meetings from 9 in the morning until nearly 6 in the evening. By the time I opened my banking app that night, the balance was already down by $4,000. I stared at the screen. Then I told myself it was probably some automatic payment I had forgotten about. I was tired. I would look into it in the morning. I did not look into it in the morning because my mother called at 8 a.m. and told me she needed me to fly home. She said it was urgent. She said my father was not feeling well again, and there were some things they needed to talk about as a family, and she needed me there in person. She sounded upset enough that I did not ask many questions. I booked a flight for the following Saturday and spent the rest of the week distracted and anxious in a low-grade way that I tried to manage by working late. I landed in Columbus on Saturday afternoon and rented a car and drove the hour and 20 minutes to my hometown on autopilot, the way you do when you have made a drive so many times it lives in your hands rather than your head. I called my mother when I turned onto their street to let her know I was close. She sounded different on the phone than she had all week. Lighter. I parked in front of the house and immediately noticed there were cars everywhere. The driveway was full. The street in front of the house was full. Cars were parked 2 houses down in both directions. I sat in the rental car for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. I walked up to the front door and could hear music and voices from inside. I knocked once out of habit and then opened the door because it was my parents' house and I had always opened the door. There were at least 70 people inside and spilling out into the backyard. The living room had been rearranged completely. The furniture pushed back against the walls, tables set up covered in pink and gold tablecloths. There were balloons everywhere, pink and white and gold, and a catered buffet set up along the back wall, with warming trays and a cake on a separate table that said, "Showering baby girl with love." There was a banner strung above the back door that read, "Welcome, baby Avery. We can't wait to meet you." I stood in my parents' doorway holding my overnight bag. My mother appeared out of the crowd with the expression of someone who had been watching the door and waiting. She was dressed up. She had her hair done. She was smiling the way she smiles in photographs. Big and deliberate and slightly performative. She said, "You made it. Isn't this something?" I looked at her. I looked around the room. I saw Danny across the room in a light pink dress, very pregnant, laughing with a group of women I mostly recognized from our mother's church circle. Danny caught my eye and waved with the uncomplicated happiness of someone who had been expecting this moment. I still remember the casual shrug. As she handed me $200 and wanders. She said, "It's your sister's baby shower. We wanted it to be a surprise for you too, so you would really feel it. We'd been planning this for 2 months." I said, "Who paid for this?" She squeezed my hands and tilted her head slightly the way she does when she thinks I am being difficult. She said, "We're family, Sophie. We take care of each other. You have always been so generous, and this is your niece. Your first niece." She paused and then she said, "We used some of your account to cover the catering and the decorations and Danny's dress. We knew you'd want to contribute. You can always make more money, sweetheart." I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "How much?" She let go of my hands and turned halfway toward the room, already redirecting. She said, "Come say hello to everyone. Danny is so happy you're here." I said again, "Mom, how much?" She said, not quite meeting my eyes, "The party planner was a little more than we expected. But everything looks beautiful, doesn't it? And you're going to be an auntie." I did the math later. In that moment, I just stood there in the doorway of my parents' living room surrounded by pink balloons and 70 people and the smell of catered chicken. And I made a decision. I decided not to make a scene. I decided to smile, find a place to sit, eat something if I could manage it, and then handle what needed to be handled. So I smiled. I went and hugged my sister. I told her she looked beautiful, which she did. I still remember the father's and his good chair near the window looking healthy and unbothered. I made small talk with relatives I see twice a year. I ate a bread roll and drank 2 glasses of water, and I watched my mother move through the party with the satisfied energy of someone who had pulled off exactly what she set out to pull off. At some point, my mother came over and leaned close to me and said quietly, "I knew you'd understand once you saw it. She deserves this." I said, "I understand completely." 2 hours later, I said I was tired from traveling and needed to lie down. I went upstairs to the room that used to be mine and I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my banking app. 14 transactions in 8 days, catering deposit, catering balance, party rental company, balloon company, custom banner, florist, cake bakery, Danny's dress, which was $412, a hotel block for out-of-town relatives, a gift card station that apparently let guests load gift cards to give Danny. The hotel block alone was over $2,000. When I added it all up, when I sat there on the edge of that childhood bed and added up every transaction, the number was $16,840. I sat very still for a while. Then I opened a new tab and called my bank's customer service line. I explained that I had unauthorized transactions on my account. I explained the situation clearly, that I had added authorized users during a family emergency, that I had attempted multiple times to remove them and been obstructed, and that in the past 8 days a total of $16,840 had been withdrawn or charged without my explicit approval for any individual transaction. The representative put me on hold twice. Then she transferred me to the fraud and disputes department. I was on the phone for 53 minutes. I stayed on the phone for all 53 of them, sitting on the edge of that bed, speaking quietly enough that no one downstairs could hear me over the music. By the end of that call, the following had happened. A formal fraud dispute had been opened on my account. The account had been frozen, no withdrawals, no new charges, no transfers in or out, pending investigation. I had been given a case number. I had been told that because the transactions were flagged as potentially unauthorized and because I was the primary account holder, the bank could move to remove the additional authorized users as part of the fraud investigation without requiring them to appear in person. I had also been told that the dispute process would take 7 to 10 business days, but that a provisional credit for the disputed amount would be applied to my account within 2 business days while the investigation was active. I also, during those 53 minutes, updated my direct deposit information through my company's HR portal using the mobile app. I directed all future deposits to my secondary account at the other bank. Then I transferred the remaining balance from the checking account, approximately $2,300, to my secondary account before the freeze was finalized. I went back downstairs. The party was winding down. Guests were saying their goodbyes. The catered buffet had been largely demolished. Danny was opening gifts in the living room, surrounded by pink tissue paper, laughing at something one of her friends had said. My mother was in the kitchen directing the cleanup. My father was still in his chair, quieter now, watching the room. I sat down near him. We did not talk much. We sat together the way we sometimes do, in the comfortable quiet that has always been easier between us than conversation. After a while he said, without looking at me, "Your mother wanted Danny to have something she would always remember." I said, "I know." He said, "You turned out fine without a lot of fuss. Danny's different." I did not respond to that. He looked at me then. Something in my face must have told him more than my words did, because he was quiet for a long moment after that. Then he said, carefully, "Are you all right?" I said, "I will be." The next morning, my mother found me in the kitchen before anyone else was up. She came downstairs in her robe and started making coffee, and I could tell she had something to say. She stood at the counter with her back to me for a minute, and then she turned around and said that she hoped I was not still upset, that she hoped I could see how much it meant to everyone, that Danny was going to name the baby after her grandmother on her father's side and not our family, and this had been a way of showing her how loved she was. I let her talk. When she finished, I said, "I called the bank last night. I reported the transactions as unauthorized. The account is frozen and there's a fraud investigation open. You and Dad are being removed from the account." My mother stared at me. I said, "The provisional credit will cover what was taken. The investigation will determine the final outcome. I've already changed my direct deposit." She said, "Sophie." I said, "I tried to take you both off that account 7 times in 18 months. You canceled every appointment." She said, "This is your family. This is your sister." I said, "I know who it is." She sat down at the kitchen table. She looked smaller than she usually does. She said, "What is Danny going to think? What are people going to say?" I said, "I genuinely don't know. That part's not something I can help with." She said, "You are being so cold. After everything we've done." I said, "I'm being clear. There's a difference." My father came downstairs about 20 minutes later. My mother had not moved from the table. He looked between us and understood enough not to ask. He poured his coffee and stood by the window. I said, to both of them, "I love you. I am not going to pretend this didn't happen or that it was okay because it wasn't. I need some time to figure out what our relationship looks like going forward, and I need that space without pressure." My father said quietly, "That's fair." My mother did not say anything. I drove back to Columbus that afternoon. I sat in the car for a long time in the rental return lot at the airport before I went inside, not because I was upset, but because I was trying to figure out what I was actually feeling. It was not the anger I expected. It was something older and more complicated than anger. It was the particular sadness of understanding something you had been working hard not to understand for a long time. I had known for longer than 18 months that my parents treated Danny differently. I had known it so long and so thoroughly that it had become part of the furniture of my life. something you navigate around without thinking much about. I was the capable one. I was the one who figured things out. I was the one who figured things out. I was the one who moved away and built something and did not need as much. That story was easier for everyone, so everyone agreed to believe it, including me. The access to my account was just the most recent chapter of that story. The most expensive chapter, maybe, but not the first. Danny called me 4 days after I got back to Austin. She said she had not known where the money came from, which I half believed. She said she was sorry, which I fully believed. She was crying a little. She asked if I would still be at the hospital when the baby came, and I said yes. Of course I would. That this was between me and our parents and had nothing to do with her daughter. She said, "I don't know how to fix this." I said, "You don't have to. It's not yours to fix." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm working on it." The fraud investigation closed 3 weeks later. The bank determined that the transactions were unauthorized, as I had documented. The provisional credit became permanent. My parents were formally removed from the account. The bank sent me a letter confirming the resolution, which I read twice and then filed. I did not get a call from my parents about the investigation outcome. I got a text from my mother that said, "I hope you're proud of yourself." I read it, set my phone down, and went for a run. My relationship with my parents is different now. Not ended. I do not think it will end because there are too many years and too much complicated love for that. But changed in a way that I think is actually more honest than what came before. I stopped pretending to be fine with things I was not fine with. I stopped making myself smaller to make them more comfortable. I stopped treating my own financial security as less important than their feelings about it. I talk to my mother about once a week now. The conversations are shorter than they used to be and more careful on both sides. My father and I have longer conversations, sometimes, especially since he started cardiac rehab and started thinking about his life in a different way. He has not apologized directly, but he has, in small sideways moments, acknowledged things that he never used to acknowledge. It is not enough, and it might never be enough, and I have mostly made my peace with that. My niece was born in March. Her name is Avery, and she weighs 8 pounds and has a full head of dark hair, and she gripped my finger in the hospital room with a seriousness that made me laugh. I sat in a chair next to Danny's bed and held that baby for a long time and felt something settle in me that had been unsettled for a very long time. My mother was there too. We did not talk about the money. We talked about Avery. There is one thing I keep coming back to when I tell this story. One thing I want to be clear about. The money mattered. Of course the money mattered. $16,840 is not an abstract number. That was months of work, months of careful saving, months of making deliberate choices about how to live my life and what to build toward. Having it taken without my knowledge or consent and without a single conversation? That was not a small thing, and I am not going to pretend it was. But the thing that changed most fundamentally was not the number in my account. It was something harder to measure. For most of my adult life, I had been operating under the belief. One I had absorbed so early, I did not know it was a belief. I thought it was just a fact. That my job in my family was to hold things together, to be capable, to have enough so that if anyone needed something, there was somewhere to turn. That belief had its costs, and I had been paying them without ever adding them up. What I found on the other side of all of this was something I did not expect. Not freedom exactly, or maybe freedom is the right word, but not the way I usually thought about it. I found the freedom of having nothing to prove, of not needing to be the capable one because it was expected, of being exactly as capable as I chose to be and no more, for reasons I chose, toward ends I decided. That is a thing no one can take out of your account. I am telling you all of this, not because my situation is unique. I know from this community that it is anything but unique, but because I think sometimes we need to hear the whole story to understand the piece of it that applies to us. Maybe your version of this is financial. Maybe it is emotional. Maybe it is years of small things that add up to a number you have never actually calculated. Whatever it is, you are the primary account holder. The access was given, it can be taken back. And some things that were taken from you, you can absolutely get back. You just have to be willing to make the call.